Welcome back to Scripture Horror. Tonight, we're rolling deep into the unforgiving backroads of Alaska with 6 of the most disturbing real trucker horror stories ever logged. These accounts come straight from drivers who've witnessed things on those frozen highways that break every rule of the open road. Each incident is taken from sealed route journals, forgotten CB recordings, and internal transport reports that were never meant for public ears. These are the truths they don't include in safety briefings. The encounters that made veteran haulers abandon their rigs and wake up shaking long after the engines went cold. If you're new here, subscribe to Scripture Horror for daily true stories guaranteed to send chills down your spine. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Now, let's ride into the haunted stretches of Alaska, where roads disappear without warning, radios hiss into silence, and something ancient follows your taillights, watching every mile you take. My name is Mike Torres, and I've been a long-haul trucker running the Denali routes for 8 years. Before trucking, I worked construction, spending long days lifting lumber and steel, building structures meant to stand longer than the workers who built them. When my back finally gave out after years of carrying weight that wasn't meant for a human spine, I traded job sites for highways, concrete floors for mountain passes, and the endless noise of machinery for the cold, quiet roads of the Alaskan wilderness. Driving felt like the perfect second life. Good pay, fresh air through the cracked window, and the steady rhythm of engines and empty highways. In 8 years behind the wheel, I'd seen everything out there. Tourists sliding into ditches on black ice, headlights reflecting off grizzlies crossing the road, sudden storms shutting down entire routes, and families panicking when their GPS died 40 miles from help. I've pulled cars out of rivers, given first aid to stranded drivers, and guided lost travelers back to safety. And in all those years, I never once lost someone on my route. That record meant something to me. It kept me steady during the worst moments. Until October. October changed everything. It was the kind of situation no CDL class, no safety training, no handbook anywhere could ever prepare you for. The kind of case that follows you home, slips into your dreams, and makes you double-check your locks even though you know you're alone. The kind that makes you consider quitting long haul entirely and transferring to some city delivery job where the worst danger is someone yelling about a late package. It all started on October 12th, a Tuesday. The weather was crisp but clear, the kind of cool autumn day that made Alaska look almost peaceful. I was hauling a load of medical supplies toward Fairbanks when dispatch crackled through my CB radio at 3:14 p.m. Torres, we've got an overdue family report. Johnson party. Last seen heading toward Eagles Rest Service Road yesterday morning. Expected back last night. I picked up the mic. Copy. How many? 4 total. Father David Johnson, 42. Mother Sarah Johnson, 39. Twin boys, Michael and Danny. 8 Eagles Rest wasn't a dangerous road, but it was remote. One of those side routes tourists loved because it looked pretty on blogs. Cell service died 2 miles in, and the area split into enough forks that a distracted family could wander off without realizing it. Usually when a family went overdue out there, they had simply camped an extra night or taken the scenic route out. But the Johnsons had a hotel booked in Fairbanks, prepaid. They didn't seem like the spontaneous type. I parked my rig near the service road, grabbed a flashlight and emergency kit, and walked to the small gravel parking area. Their blue Honda Pilot sat there. At first glance, it looked normal, but then I looked inside. Their emergency beacon, first aid kit, extra food, heavy jackets, all untouched in the back seat. No family goes into remote Alaska without gear, especially not with kids. I circled the vehicle. Doors locked. No broken windows. No damage. The ground around the tires was undisturbed. No footprints. Nothing. I radioed dispatch. Base, I'm at Eagles Rest. Vehicle confirmed. Emergency gear still inside. A pause. Still inside? All of it? Affirmative. That's unusual. You're telling me. I moved up the service road on foot. For the first mile, everything looked normal. Fine gravel underfoot, pine needles scattered, tire and boot marks from the day before. Then something blue caught my eye along the brush line. A backpack. Or what was left of one. The fabric was shredded, long rips like claws had torn through it. But instead of being scattered like garbage after an animal attack, The pieces were stacked neatly beside the road, arranged, placed. I lifted my radio. Base. I found the torn backpack. Looks clawed, but placement is strange. No scattering. Any bear sign? I checked the area. No tracks. No broken branches. No scat. No scent. Nothing. Negative, I answered. No indicators. That was when I noticed the blood. Not much, just a thin trail of drops leading off the gravel road. Too neat. Too deliberate. A bear attack is chaos. People run. Blood sprays in unpredictable patterns. But this trail looked like someone walking calmly with a mild cut. I followed it for half a mile, spotting pieces of the family's gear placed carefully along the way. Water bottle balanced upright on a stump, granola wrapper tucked under a rock, a child's baseball cap hung intentionally on a branch. Nothing dropped in panic. Everything arranged like markers. I radioed again. Base, this isn't an animal attack. Someone's leaving a trail. Protocol said, turn back, wait for a full search team in the morning, but something deep in my gut, cold sharp, told me the Johnsons didn't have until morning. I returned at dawn and headed straight for the point where I'd lost the trail. That's when I found their campsite. It was about half a mile off-road, beside a stream. A picture-perfect camp spot. The tent was set up flawlessly, rainfly secure, sleeping bags unrolled. A ring of cold ashes sat in the fire pit, looked about a day old. Their cooking gear lay beside a small fold-up table as if someone had been preparing breakfast and then simply walked away. No overturned chairs. No torn fabric. Nothing out of place. No footprints suggesting panic or a struggle. I reported in. Base, I found their camp. Everything looks normal. Too normal. That's when I saw the tracks. 4 sets of human prints, 2 adult, 2 child. But circling the campsite were others. Barefoot. Human-sized, but not right. Toes too long, spaced too wide. The walking pattern was irregular, looping around the tent in strange arcs. Approaching the entrance, stopping, backing away. Again and again. I crouched by one track. No normal person moved like this. There were others here, I radioed. Barefoot. Patterns inconsistent with human gait. Torres, what exactly are you dealing with? I'm not sure yet. I followed the family's prints deeper into the forest. At one spot, all 4 sets suddenly shifted direction, as if the whole family turned at the exact same moment, like they'd been guided. Or herded. 50 yards ahead, I found David Johnson's wallet placed on a flat rock. Not dropped, not flung. Placed. Credit cards inside. Cash untouched. Another 50 yards and I found Sarah's wedding ring hanging from a branch, swaying softly in the morning breeze. The boy's shoes rested side by side on a fallen log, laces undone. Whoever or whatever did this wanted to be followed. The deeper I walked, the more wrong the forest felt. Sound moved strangely, carrying echoes that didn't belong. The wind felt thin, weak, and every step I took echoed farther than it should. Then I heard it, whistling, human whistling. But off, too sharp, too high-pitched. Like something trying to copy a human tune but not quite getting it right. Every time I stopped, it stopped. Every time I walked, it moved ahead of me. By evening, the feeling of being watched burrowed into my spine. Soft snaps of branches behind me, whispers just out of reach. Every time I turned, nothing was there. The forest felt crowded, but my eyes saw only emptiness. That night, I set up camp 3 miles from where I'd started. When I tried my radio, all I got was static. That had never happened on this road before. My satellite phone couldn't connect either. GPS showed my coordinates perfectly, but every communication tool failed at once. Then the children started laughing. Soft. Echoing through the trees. Happy laughter. The kind you'd hear at a playground. But there was something wrong about the echo, like it was bouncing through spaces that shouldn't exist, and underneath the laughter was whispering. Layered voices. Continuous. Never stopping. I followed the sound to a clearing where a makeshift shelter stood, branches and pine boughs woven into a nest-like structure. Dozens of charcoal drawings covered the surrounding trees, children's drawings, but twisted, Stick figure families with adults lying flat, faces crossed out, children with too long arms, too many teeth. Inside the shelter, I found Michael and Danny, sitting quietly, whispering to each other, physically unharmed. But something about them was deeply wrong. Their faces too calm, too still. Children don't sit like statues. Michael? Danny? I whispered. They looked up slowly, studying me with empty curiosity. Hello, one said. Are you here to learn? I'm Torres, I told them. Where are your parents? They whispered to each other, too soft to understand. They graduated already, the boy said. They're at the teaching place. Show me. They rose together, moving in eerie unison, and led me to another clearing. That's where I found David and Sarah, sitting cross-legged on the ground, eyes open, breathing, alive, but mentally gone, empty. Like their personalities had been wiped away, leaving behind functioning bodies with no one home inside. Mom and Dad learned their lessons, one twin said. Now they're quiet inside. I checked their vitals. Perfectly normal. But they didn't react when I touched their shoulders, didn't blink when I called their names. Who taught them? I whispered. The old student, they said together. He taught us too. A rustling behind me made my blood turn to ice. A teenage boy stepped out from behind a tree. Filthy, clothes ripped and patched with bark, nails long, hair tangled. But his eyes were sharp and hungry. I'm the teacher now, he whispered. He explained the cycle, how one child learns from the student before him, how adults are taught to be silent inside, how new arrivals become students, how it had been happening for a long time. More children emerged from the trees, forming a loose circle around me. Calm, whispering, eyes empty. Would you like to learn? The teenage teacher asked. Adults always resist at first. The circle tightened, not rushing me, just closing in, certain of the outcome. My heart pounded against my ribs. The adults sat frozen around the clearing like discarded dolls. The younger children whispered lessons I couldn't understand. When their focus shifted toward the teacher, I bolted. Branches tore at my jacket. Whispers rose behind me. No footsteps thundered after me. They didn't have to. They knew I wouldn't escape. They believed no one ever left the teaching place. It took hours, running, stumbling, crawling, until finally my radio crackled to life. Base, this is Torres, I gasped. Emergency. Full SAR team. FBI. Multiple victims. I found them. God, there are children. Send everyone. The rescue took 2 days. With dozens of rangers, troopers, and federal agents, we located the adults exactly where I'd seen them, alive but empty. 9 children whispered nonstop, resisting rescue with eerie calm. The adults never recovered. The children only regained pieces of themselves after years of therapy. None could explain what happened. The teenage teacher disappeared. No tracks, no sign, nothing. I transferred to a city driving job within months. I can't handle isolated routes anymore. Sometimes late at night when my apartment windows rattle from wind, I hear faint whistling. Sometimes laughter, sometimes whispers asking if I'm ready for my first lesson. And every time, I remember the empty faces in that clearing and the quiet inside them. Some students should never graduate. Some lessons should never be taught. My name is Sarah Kim, and I've been a long-haul trucker for 9 years now. Before this, I spent 6 exhausting years in retail mopping floors, calming angry customers, spending every holiday under buzzing fluorescent lights. I always loved the open road, the quiet stretches of highway where the world feels bigger than all your problems, and I knew retail wasn't where my life was meant to stay. I wanted a job that mattered, something that let me help people and let me breathe. After I became a trucker, I handled everything the highways threw at me. Whiteout blizzards, stalled engines on remote mountain roads, lost tourists, wrecked wildlife on the shoulder, angry bears rummaging through truck stops, even the occasional group of drug runners hiding in abandoned rest areas. I thought I'd seen every kind of danger the road could offer. But what happened last month on the remote trucking route near Glacier Bay changed everything I believed about human nature and about love itself. It was a Tuesday morning when my CB crackled to life. Sarah, we've got a missing persons case. Married couple, David and Lisa Chen, driving a pickup towing a small camper. They're 4 days overdue reporting in. 4 days. Out here, once someone's that overdue on these isolated highways, hope thins fast. You don't expect survivors, just abandoned rigs or worse. I loaded up my truck with the usual emergency gear, GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency radio, flares, and enough water to last 3 days. As I drove toward the last location, their plates were flagged, winding through cold, silent mountain roads. All I could think about was how quickly things go wrong out here. A wrong turn. A slick patch of black ice. A stalled engine with no cell service. Hypothermia. Predators. Out here, the wilderness and the highway both punish mistakes without thinking twice. The Chens had planned a 3-day anniversary trip, towing their camper out to an isolated pull-off with a gorgeous mountain view. Their file said they were experienced travelers with well-maintained gear. David worked for an insurance company. Lisa was a nurse. Smart people. Prepared. They should have been fine. But when I reached the turnout where their camper had been parked, something felt wrong the moment I stepped out. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Their camper was leveled, locked, and neatly arranged like they'd just stepped out for a moment. Inside, both sleeping bags were zipped tight and untouched, like no one had ever used them. Their portable stove was spotless on the small picnic table beside unopened cans of food. Even their toiletries were arranged in a precise, deliberate row outside the camper door. But what hit me hardest, the thing that made my stomach twist, was their electronics. Both their phones sat on the table, fully charged. Their last messages were normal, cheerful, beautiful trip, weather perfect, see you when we get back. Next to the phones were their keys, wallets, and ID cards, lined up like they'd been placed there carefully. People don't vanish leaving everything behind, not experienced travelers. Not couples celebrating something important. Even if they'd gone for a short walk, they would have taken water, keys, or at least one phone. Yet their water bottles sat full, untouched. Back at the station yard, I dug through old missing truck reports from the same region. What I found chilled me. 6 other couples had vanished on this exact route in the past 2 years. All of them experienced travelers, all of their rigs found undisturbed. All valuables neatly left behind. All disappeared on clear days with no storms, no mechanical failures, no natural explanation. Piece by piece, the reports piled in front of me like a pattern demanding to be seen. At first, the couples seemed unrelated. Different ages, different states, different backgrounds. But then I saw it. They were all celebrating something. Anniversaries. Engagements. A promotion. Special trips for people who loved each other. That's when I drove into the nearby truck stop, Murphy's Gas and General, the last place the Chens had been seen. Pete, the owner, remembered them instantly. Nice folks, he said. Stopped in 3 days before they disappeared. Bought extra batteries and snacks. Then his expression shifted. What I really remember is the young guy who was talking to them. Talking how? I asked. Pete shrugged. Kid looked early 20s. Clean-cut, polite. He overheard them asking about scenic pull-offs and jumped right in. Told them the best spots for privacy, views, camping. Real helpful kid. He described the man-average height, brown hair, old pickup truck, a face that had become familiar to locals over the past 2 years. Always friendly. Always eager to help travelers. You've seen him recommend that same pull-off before, haven't you? I asked, though the answer was already clawing at me. Pete nodded slowly. Now that you mention it, yeah. Quite a few couples. I spent the next week tracking down people who had spotted the missing couples before they vanished. Every story was the same. A friendly young man, helpful advice. A recommendation for the exact same isolated turnout. So I returned to the route, this time with my partner Jake, another trucker who volunteered for search and assist. We spent hours combing through the woods beyond the pull-off, checking places no normal traveler would go. That's when Jake's voice tightened over the radio. Sarah, you need to see this. Hidden 40 yards up a slope, camouflaged with branches, was a professional-grade trail camera. The kind hunters use to track animals. It had a perfect angle of the entire turnout. My hands shook as I pulled the memory card. Back in the station office, we loaded the footage onto my laptop. Months of recordings. Mostly empty road, birds, idle wind, normal wildlife. But when we found the files showing the missing couples, my breath locked. The footage began simple. Couples pulling in, setting up camp, making dinner, laughing, crawling into their camper. Normal, happy moments. But in several shots, a figure stood among the trees, watching, completely still, for hours, just watching the couple sleep. Then we fast-forwarded to the night the Chens disappeared. At 3:12 a.m., a figure stepped from the shadows into the turnout. A young man. Exactly as Pete described, he moved with practiced ease, going straight to their water bottles. He pulled out a syringe, injected each bottle, and put them back precisely. It took less than 3 minutes. Then he slipped into the darkness. The next day's footage showed the Chens drinking from those bottles at breakfast. Within 20 minutes, both collapsed. I sent the bottles to forensics. The results confirmed my worst fear: powerful sedatives causing temporary paralysis but leaving the victim fully conscious. Awake. Aware. Trapped. Following tire tracks from the turnout, we traced them to an old mining area 8 miles away. The mines had been abandoned for decades. But someone had been there recently. The main shaft door was reinforced steel, locked with multiple heavy bolts. Inside, the smell hit first: rust, damp stone, and rot beneath it. Someone had built crude living quarters inside. Functional. Terrifying. Restraints bolted to walls, cameras in every corner. Filing cabinets stuffed with journals. Those journals were the worst pages of psychological observations. Notes on each couple's emotional collapse. Timelines. Experiments. Which partner begged first? Which betrayed? Which broke? Which broke? The writer discussed fear like a scientist taking notes on lab animals. He wrote calmly about watching love crumble, convinced he was uncovering some grand truth. And in the mine's deepest chamber, behind a locked steel grate, we found David and Lisa. They were alive. Barely. But the people they'd once been, the couple who spent 12 years loving each other, were gone. Lisa cried when we approached. David turned away. They wouldn't speak, except to blame each other. "It's his fault," Lisa whispered. He wouldn't stop talking to that man at the gas station. "She drank the water first," David muttered. "She said it tasted funny but made me drink it anyway." Marcus's research had succeeded. He'd shattered their trust completely. We were still gathering evidence when footsteps echoed through the tunnel. I ducked behind a stack of mining crates, weapon drawn. The young man who entered looked so normal it felt unreal. Clean shirt, calm face. Average height. He saw me instantly but didn't run. "Officer," he said politely, "you're contaminating my research site." My pulse thundered. "Your research?" "I study how romantic bonds collapse under extreme pressure," he explained as casually as presenting a school project. "These couples have provided exceptional data. My professors rejected my dissertation. They lacked vision. So I had to collect the data myself." He scrolled through his phone, showing clips of other couples suffering, crying, begging, turning on each other. "Love dies the moment you introduce real consequences," he said proudly. "I can make any couple hate each other in under 3 weeks." I kept him talking until backup arrived. He didn't resist. He believed he was a misunderstood scientist, not a predator. We found 4 other couples alive in different chambers. Alive, but broken. 8 people who once planned futures together, now unable to be in the same room. Marcus Webb, 26, brilliant student turned monster. Declared competent. Sentenced to life without parole. Still insisting he'd made valuable scientific progress. All 6 rescued couples divorced within 11 months. The hardest part was watching the Chens testify. They spoke separately, unable to look at each other. Each convinced the other had chosen self-preservation first. Marcus had destroyed 12 years of love in 3 weeks. I stayed a trucker, but I transferred to a search and assist unit. I couldn't handle another criminal investigation like that. It changed something in me. I've been with my boyfriend Tom for 4 years. I love him deeply. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what we would do if we were pushed to the edge. Would our love survive, or would fear rip it apart? Marcus was wrong about love being an illusion. But he was right about one thing. Fear can destroy anything if you let it. I still drive past the turnout where those couples vanished. It looks peaceful now. Just a quiet patch of road, trees, a picnic table. But I always scan the woods a little longer than necessary. Because you never know who might be watching. You never know who might be waiting to prove that everything you value can be taken away. If you ever take a trip with someone you love, trust your instincts. And if a helpful stranger suggests the perfect secluded turnout, maybe choose a different one. Some people collect coins, some collect postcards. Marcus Webb collected proof that love breaks. My name is Tommy Rodriguez, and I've been a delivery driver for Northern Company for years. I run the remote Alaska routes, the ones other drivers pray they never get assigned, the ones where a wrong turn doesn't just delay you, it erases you. Out there, if the cold doesn't take you, the distance will. If the distance doesn't, the wildlife will. Cabins hidden so deep in the trees, you need coordinates just to find a driveway. Places where a storm can swallow you whole before you even realize the sky has changed. Most drivers last one winter, maybe two. I lasted longer because I grew up in Minnesota, learned early that cold is just another kind of weight you carry. But I didn't know then that cold isn't the real danger. Not even close. I didn't know that the worst predators out there are the ones who look exactly like the people you trust. February 12th started like any routine delivery day. I left Anchorage at 6 a.m., grabbed my thermos, ran the checklist, and loaded my truck with generators, heaters, canned goods, everything people out in the bush need to survive winter. 4 cabins on the route, all families I'd delivered to before. Regular folks, not the off-grid doomsday type. Just people who liked their space and paid good money to keep it. They always left me tips inside envelopes by the door. Always offered me coffee, asked how the roads were. Good people. The kind who make the long drives worth it. By the time I finished my first 3 stops, the weather still looked clear. The air had that brittle shine it gets before night temperatures hit the negatives, but nothing unusual. I kept thinking I might even get home early. Henderson Place was the last stop, a retired couple who ran a hunting lodge during the summer. Their road was rough, a narrow track through dense pine forest that wound like a snake for nearly 40 minutes before it reached their cabin. I'd done it twice before. Hard drive, but manageable. I figured I'd unload the supplies, maybe accept a cup of coffee, then head back before the roads iced over. I was halfway down their track when the sky changed. Not cloudy. Not stormy. Dark. As if someone had pulled a heavy curtain over the sun. One moment the world was gray-blue daylight, the next it was twilight so fast it made my stomach flip. I slowed immediately. Snow started falling in thick, fast sheets, so heavy it erased the hood of my truck. My wipers struggled against it, smearing white instead of clearing it. I tapped my radio. Nothing but static. Switched to backup frequencies. Still nothing. My GPS glitched, snapping my location to random places miles apart. Even my satellite phone refused to connect. In Alaska, weather changes fast, but not like that. Not in minutes. Not like the world was turning itself inside out. Wind hit the truck hard enough to rock the frame. Snow swirled in violent spirals that made it impossible to tell up from down. It felt like driving inside a collapsing tunnel. Every instinct I had screamed the same thing: find shelter. I remembered an old emergency cabin drivers used during storms, a hunting shack maintained by the state. Always unlocked, always stocked. If I could keep the truck on the road long enough, I could make it. I crawled forward at 5 miles per hour, following the ghostly suggestion of the road by feel alone, letting the tires guide me where my eyes couldn't. When the outline of the cabin finally appeared through the whiteout, just a dark blot in the swirling snow, I felt a wave of relief so sharp it was almost painful. I parked as close as I could, grabbed my emergency bag, and forced my way through the wind to the door. It opened easily. Inside, warmth from a small wood stove wrapped around me like a blanket. But what stopped me cold wasn't the heat. It was the 3 people already sitting around the stove, bundled in winter coats, faces pale from the cold. They stared at me for a moment before an older man closest to the fire smiled and waved me in. "Another refugee from the storm," he said. "Plenty of room. Come warm up." He introduced himself as Jim, said he was an electrician from Fairbanks. The woman beside him, Martha, claimed she worked as a cashier in Anchorage. The third, Dr. Stevens, said he was a dentist visiting a patient when the storm trapped him. They looked like ordinary people stuck in extraordinary weather. Tired, shaken, grateful for company. The kind of people you instantly relax around. Martha poured me a cup of coffee. Jim cracked jokes about Alaska winters. Dr. Stevens asked polite questions about my route, how long I'd been driving, what supplies I carried. We shared jerky, shared stories, tried to pretend the storm outside wasn't shaking the walls like an angry animal. Everything felt normal. A little too normal. On the third day, I started noticing cracks. Not big ones, small enough to ignore if you wanted to, but I've spent enough time alone in storms to trust the quiet voice in my head that says something is wrong. Jim said he grew up in Anchorage, but later talked about his favorite childhood restaurant in Fairbanks. When I asked for the name, he mentioned a place that had shut down years ago. Martha talked about her grocery job, but her description was off policies that didn't exist, procedures nobody used. I worked retail once. I know how shift rotations work. She didn't. Dr. Carmes and Man White. Stevens kept asking oddly specific questions about delivery routes, timing, quantities, how many drivers were assigned each region, what we carried for emergencies. Not small talk. Not interest. Research. By the fourth day, the feeling in my gut had shifted from uneasy to sick. They whispered when they thought I was asleep. Stopped talking when I walked into a room. Their eyes flicked toward my jacket too often. That night, I pretended to sleep. At around 3 a.m., I watched Martha slip quietly across the cabin. She reached into my jacket pockets, wallet, keys, phone, carefully returning each item exactly as she found it. Then she took out a small notebook and wrote something. Names, maybe, details. She whispered to Jim. He nodded and wrote something too. My heart hammered, but I stayed still. In the morning, I confronted her. Her expression changed instantly, like she shed a mask. Jim stood up. Dr. Stevens stepped in front of the door. Martha's smile twisted into something cold. "You're more observant than most," she said softly. "That makes this harder." Jim opened the notebook. Inside were pages filled with names, addresses, delivery schedules. All drivers. All remote routes. My name was there too. Age. Address. Family details. Even the emergency cash I kept in my wallet. "How do you know all that?" I whispered. Dr. Stevens answered calmly, like he was explaining a dental procedure. "We've been doing this for months. We pick remote areas with bad weather. Find a cabin. Wait. Drivers always come. You trust us. You share more than you realize. And when the storm passes, we take what we need." "What happened to the others?" I asked. The silence was heavier than the storm. The ones who cooperated got a quick death, Dr. Quick Deck. Stevens said. The others took longer. That's when the stains on the floor looked different. Darker. Older. The scratches near the door. Not where. Not age. Desperation. "We usually drug the coffee by the third night," Martha added. "Ran out with the last driver. They tied me up. Rope tight enough to cut skin. For 7 days I stayed like that, wrists raw and bleeding as they argued about how to kill me." Jim wanted to stage a freezing death. Martha insisted the search teams might find the body too close to the cabin. Dr. Stevens wanted an accident. They were running low on food, low on patience. They talked casually about the other victims, how one begged, how one tried to run, how one prayed until the end. They remembered every detail. On the 7th day, they made a mistake. Martha stepped outside to check the road. Jim and Dr. Stevens were arguing about timing. I'd been weakening the ropes for days, twisting and pulling until strands snapped like brittle thread. When Martha's back turned, I slid one wrist out, then the other. My hands were numb, shaking, but I moved fast, ran to the storage room, slammed the door, and locked it before they realized I was free. Inside sat an old hand-crank hunting radio. I cranked it until my palms blistered. Static. More static. Then, finally, a voice. "Ranger Station 7, go ahead." "This is an emergency," I gasped. "3 people. Cabin on Moose Creek Road. They've killed others. Please send help." The operator kept me talking, asking for details, keeping me calm. Outside, Jim and the others pounded on the door. Dr. Stevens swung an axe, splintering wood with each blow. I kept talking. Wouldn't let them silence me. Then I heard it. Helicopter rotors. Close. The rest blurred. Rangers crashed through the main door. Jim, Martha, and Dr. Stevens tried flipping the story, claiming I attacked them. But the notebook, the stains, the remains found in the woods, too much evidence. The police identified links to disappearances stretching back years. None of their names were real. All 3 received life sentences. I returned to Anchorage cleared of everything, but I wasn't the same. I can't drive remote routes anymore. Every empty road feels like a trap. Every stranded motorist looks like bait. I stick to city routes now, traffic, stoplights, people everywhere. Maybe it makes me look weak, the guy who once drove the hardest roads too scared to leave town. But I know better. I know now that the most dangerous predators in Alaska aren't the wolves or the bears. They're the ones who smile at you across a warm fire during a storm and wait for you to trust them. My name is Paul Johnson, and I've been a long-haul trucker running the Alaskan interior routes for years now. Before this, I spent years as a diesel mechanic working on everything from broken-down semis to heavy construction equipment. I thought I'd seen everything. Oil fires, flipped rigs, freeze-cracked engines, reckless drivers who should have never touched a steering wheel. But nothing in all those years prepared me for what I found out on the mountain roads months ago. I learned something out there that still shakes me when I hear an engine idle in the dark. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't on the road. Sometimes they're sitting in the passenger seat of your own mind, waiting for the right moment to take the wheel. It was early October when dispatch sent me a call I knew was going to be bad. An expedition group using the old McKinley logging roads as a wilderness therapy experience had failed to return to their pickup point. Their convoy was supposed to come out 2 days earlier, but they never arrived. The storm system rolling across the mountains meant that if someone didn't get to them fast, those dirt roads would become buried under sheets of ice and snow. I knew the trip leader, Dr. Cobley, Elizabeth Cray by reputation. She was a trauma specialist, a psychiatrist who worked with people carrying the darkest memories a person could survive. Veterans with combat scars, women escaping violent homes, survivors of catastrophic accidents. She helped them all. Her therapy method was unusual, but well-respected. Take people into the wild where cell service drops, roads vanish, and the only thing left to face is yourself. My job was simple on paper: take my freight truck as far up the abandoned logging route as it could go without rolling into a ravine, then hike the remaining miles to their last known location. I loaded extra fuel, emergency blankets, food, medical supplies, and a radio unit that barely worked on clear days, let alone stormy ones. When I turned off the main highway and onto that old road, the forest felt wrong immediately. No wind pushing through the branches. No birds lifting off in a panic from the sound of my engine. Even the gravel under my tires sounded muted, like the world was holding its breath. After years on these isolated routes, you learn when the wilderness is warning you. Something was off, and I felt it in my bones. I reached the spot where the road narrowed and killed the engine. The silence slammed into me. I hiked toward their first campsite under a gray sky that looked ready to burst. When I reached it around noon, everything appeared normal at first glance. Fire pit cold but neatly built, cooking area organized. Gear stowed properly. It was exactly what I'd expect from a group led by someone like Cray. But then I saw the carvings, deep, sharp symbols cut into a nearby tree. They looked like military rank marks. Not doodles, not random cuts. Intentional. Structured. Trucker or not, I'd worked with enough veterans in my mechanic days to recognize a chain of command symbol when I saw one. Therapy groups did not carve ranks into trees. I hiked deeper into the forest along the faint tire tracks from their ATVs. A few miles in, I found their second campsite, and this one was different. Wrong. The fire pit wasn't just a fire pit. It was massive, surrounded by logs placed in perfect rows like seats in a briefing room. Someone wasn't camping. Someone was instructing, leading, training. And those symbols, more of them carved into several trees, arranged in a formation pattern I recognized from military convoy diagrams. Whoever took control of this group understood discipline, understood hierarchy, understood how to command. By the time I reached the third campsite, the storm clouds had swallowed the sun, and the wind had turned sharp and icy. This site looked like something out of a survivalist nightmare. Food wrappers were everywhere, but not evenly. One section had piles of empty packages. Other sections had almost none. Someone was controlling who ate and how much. This wasn't disorganization. It was rationing. Enforced rationing. And carved into a thick trunk at the center of the site were the words that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The weak must be removed. The forest crackled with the feeling of something spiraling out of control. I kept moving. The storm wasn't waiting for anyone, and every hour I spent out there increased the chance I'd be trapped with whatever had taken over this group. When I reached the fourth campsite near a narrow creek, something caught my eye. A leather journal half buried under a pile of rocks like someone had tried to hide it. It was water damaged around the edges, but the pages were mostly intact. The name on the inside cover, Dr. Elizabeth Cray. I opened it expecting dry notes about treatment progress. Instead, the first few entries charted a slow descent into something I recognized instantly, a group losing its mind. The early pages were normal. She wrote about her patients just like a trucker logs miles. Jake, the military vet struggling with combat trauma. Maria, recovering from a violent assault. 4 others, each wrestling with their own demons. But then the entries changed. Her tone shifted from confident and clinical to panicked, unsure, frightened. Jake had taken over food distribution, argued that strength determined resource priority. When she questioned him, the others sided with him. Maria said the doctor didn't understand survival priorities. Cray wrote that she'd somehow lost control of the entire group in days. Another entry described Jake, assigning ranks to everyone except her. Every morning, the group marched in formation. When she tried to reinstate therapy sessions, they laughed. Maria told her that weakness training was over. The group reduced her rations next, called her dead weight. The entries grew frantic, her handwriting shaking across the page. They burned her therapy materials, tore up her notes, destroyed her guides. Jake claimed books weaken the mind. The others cheered. They talked about building a permanent settlement, staying out there forever. When she mentioned search parties, Maria smiled and said, "Let them come." The next entries chilled me deeper than the cold. Jake had convinced them that killing her was part of their therapeutic progression. They debated methods. Maria preferred a knife. The group practiced hunting small animals to prepare for the ceremony. Cray planned to run. The final pages were frantic scribbles, her describing their pursuit, their voices calling through the trees, their excitement. And then one entry made my heart stop. She mentioned me by name, wrote that I had found her, that she feared I didn't believe her, which meant she had escaped only briefly. And the group was still out there. I followed their tracks as the wind howled through the branches. The temperature kept dropping. Ice was forming along the edges of my sleeves. Near dusk, I reached their final camp. 7 figures sat around a massive fire. 6 of them were clean and strong-looking, arranged in perfect symmetry like a unit awaiting orders. Cloth armbands marked with the same carved symbols wrapped around their arms. Sitting apart from them, thin as a shadow, was the doctor. When she saw me, she stumbled toward me, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Ranger Johnson," she cried, though out here I wasn't a ranger. I was the nearest warm body with a truck. "Please. You have to get me out of here. They're going to kill me." Jake stood up. Broad-shouldered, posture rigid with military discipline. "Driver," he said calmly, "the doctor has been showing signs of severe psychological collapse. She threatened us. We've been trying to help her." "That's not true," she screamed, voice breaking. "Tell him what you planned. Tell him about the ceremony." Jake's expression didn't change. "She's hallucinating. You're frightening her by entertaining these delusions." The other 5 nodded in perfect unison, like synchronized gears in a machine. Maria stepped forward. She tried to attack Jake with a knife. We had to restrain her. I looked at the doctor. She couldn't have overpowered a fox, let alone a trained soldier. The lie was too clean, too rehearsed. "Everyone packs up," I ordered. "We're leaving together." Jake's calm slipped only for a second. Something cold flickered in his eyes. The others shifted, creating a formation around me without speaking. Dr. Cray whispered one word so softly I almost missed it. "Run." Maria took a step toward me. "The doctor is unstable." Jake reached into his pack and pulled out a sharpened wooden spear. "Driver," he said softly, "you don't understand our process." That's when the forest exploded. I grabbed Cray and sprinted into the trees as Maria lunged. The others moved like special forces, silent, coordinated, deadly. Their footsteps tracked us with chilling precision. Every time we stopped, even for a second, their voices floated through the darkness. "Doctor," Maria called sweetly, "Jake says your final session awaits." "Running isn't therapeutic," Jake's voice echoed. We ran through the frozen night until our bodies gave up. Dawn finally spilled across the mountains, and we stumbled onto the main trail where a search team spotted us. The official report blamed extreme wilderness stress. Said Jake manipulated them. Said group psychosis took over. The 6 patients were found later, calm, cooperative, insisting they were victims. Doctors said Jake twisted their minds. Cray lost everything. Her license, her career, her reputation. She lives quietly now, far from any forest. When I spoke to her last month, she said she still hears them calling her name in the dark. Experts say it was psychological manipulation. But sometimes, when I'm parked alone on a mountain turnout with the engine idling and the wind pressing against the windows, I'm not so sure. Maybe it wasn't just Jake. Maybe something out there got into them. I still drive these routes, but I don't volunteer for rescue work anymore. I don't trust people the way I used to, because I learned one thing on that mountain that I'll never forget. Sometimes the people who promise to guide you are the ones planning your destruction. And sometimes the scariest monsters look exactly like the people asking you to follow them into the dark. My name is Rebecca Stone, and I've been a long-haul trucker for years. Before that, I spent years working as a social worker, dealing with kids who had already drowned in darkness long before adulthood. Back then, I thought I understood evil. I thought I understood manipulation, danger, the way predators wrap themselves in kindness until it's too late to run. But what happened years ago on an isolated Alaska freight route taught me how naive I really was. Monsters don't always hide under beds. Sometimes they drive clean trucks, wear warm smiles, and hand you paperwork that looks perfect. It started in late June, peak delivery season, when the back highways between Anchorage and the rural towns get jammed with supply runs. I had a route that cut near Devil's Creek, a remote service road hardly anyone uses unless they're delivering equipment or running timber. Halfway through my shift, dispatch pinged me about a flagged complaint. Some private group had been reported parking multiple commercial trucks off a restricted pullout. Since I was the only driver nearby, they asked me to swing by and check if it was blocking the road or posing a safety hazard. Nothing sounded unusual. Drivers stop where they shouldn't all the time. I expected a couple of overnighters taking a break from the highway. The morning was calm. The sky was clean. My rig hummed beneath me like it had 100 times before. The dirt road to Devil's Creek was rough, but I'd handled worse. Everything felt familiar and safe, until it didn't. When I rolled up to the pullout, I hit the brakes hard. 8 trucks were parked in a perfect circular formation. Large, clean box trucks with fresh paint jobs and no company names. Every one of them matched. In the center of that circle, someone had set up a full outdoor kitchen, heavy-duty storage bins, folding tables, even a generator running a steady hum. This wasn't a bunch of drivers resting. This was a planned, constructed, long-term operation hiding miles from the main road. I barely stepped out of my cab when a man approached with a smile stretched just a little too wide. Clean hiking jacket, spotless boots, perfectly trimmed beard. He looked like he'd walked out of a brochure instead of the Alaskan backcountry. He extended his hand like we were old friends. "Driver, thank goodness you're here," he said warmly. I was hoping someone from the transport network might stop by. That was my first warning. Truckers don't greet strangers out here with joy. "I'm Stone," I said. "This pullout is restricted. You can't stage vehicles here." "Oh, of course," he replied smoothly. "We actually have permits. We're running a wilderness rehabilitation program for troubled teens. Everything is properly authorized. He handed me a folder filled with professionally printed documents, signatures, logos, a convincing permit number. I'd seen countless youth program forms in my years of social work, real ones. Nothing about it immediately screamed fake, but my gut twisted anyway. These kids come from juvenile facilities and group homes, he added. We're giving them a 2-week nature immersion. They're learning responsibility. That's when I noticed the kids. 8 of them, 1 for each tent they'd set up behind the trucks. They looked washed and fed, but their eyes flicked toward him when he wasn't looking with something sharper than fear. Something like calculation. Something like desperation. Mind if I talk to them? I asked. Safety check. Of course, he said, but the edges of his smile tightened. Though many have behavioral disorders, they lie to authority figures. Real program leaders don't warn you not to believe kids. I walked to 3 teens sitting by a truck, 2 girls, 1 boy. Hey, I said softly, name's Rebecca. How's the program treating you? They exchanged fast glances like they were waiting for a cue. It's good, the blonde girl finally said. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. Yeah, the boy added quickly. We're learning skills. But it was the red-headed girl, skin pale, freckles across her cheeks, who kept sneaking looks at me. She'd glance at me, then instantly at the man behind me, then back. A silent SOS. I tested them. Favorite part so far? They froze. Completely. Real kids always had something to say. Complaints. Jokes. Anything. But these kids had nothing because they weren't allowed to have anything. The educational parts, the blonde said stiffly. Before I could continue, the man Bill Henderson appeared at my shoulder without a sound. Driver Stone, I'm afraid we need to resume our schedule. As we walked back toward my rig, the redhead hurried past us. She held something small in her hand. At the last second, she tried to slip it into my jacket. Henderson saw. His smile collapsed. His eyes went cold, flat, predatory. Sarah, he snapped, what did I tell you about interfering? She froze, shaking. I wasn't. Go. His voice was a threat wrapped in silk. She ran. His smile returned, but it never reached his eyes. Sorry about that. She fabricates stories. She likely tried to give you one. I didn't want to surrender the note, but I also didn't want to put her in more danger. I handed it over. He opened it, read it, and crushed it in his fist. Lies, he said lightly. Manipulative tactics. But I had already seen the words. Shaky handwriting. 2 of the simplest and most terrifying words a kid can write. Help us. Cold slid down my spine. I'll need to verify your permits with my supervisor, I said carefully. That's fine, he answered, but something shifted in his face. Although our funding is federal, so your local office may not have us in their system. He was stalling. We both knew it. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll be here, he lied. I drove away, heart pounding, my hands tight on the wheel. Every instinct I had, everyone built from years of dealing with damaged, manipulated kids, was screaming. But the documents looked so official. The trucks looked so professional. Everything about the setup was designed to hide the truth in plain sight. At the depot, I found Tom Martinez, my old supervisor from my early days, now the regional transport coordinator. He was the kind of guy you could trust to see through bullshit. Tom, I said, I need to check a wilderness rehab group staging trucks off-route. Something's off. What's the organization? Alaska Youth Wilderness Recovery. Leader is Bill Henderson. Silence. Never heard of them, he said. Let me check. An hour later, he called back. Rebecca, that organization doesn't exist. No registration, no federal funding, no permits, nothing. My stomach sank. Tom, there are 8 kids out there. Get your gear, he said. We're going now. I'm calling state police. We reached Devil's Creek at dawn, me, Tom, 2 other drivers who volunteered, and a state trooper. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed the trucks would be there, but the pullout was empty. Not abandoned, erased. No trucks, no tents, no tire tracks, no footprints. They'd cleaned the entire site like they'd never existed, except 3 teenagers were sitting near the tree line. They were thin, filthy, shaking. One was Sarah. The trooper and I ran to them while Tom called for medical backup. "Sarah," I said gently, kneeling beside her. "Where's everyone?" "He left," she whispered. "He took the others. He said we were too sick to travel." "How long have you kids been out here?" the trooper asked. "Years," one boy said. He looked 16 but carried the exhaustion of someone much older. "We've been with him for years." The truth spilled out in broken pieces. Henderson wasn't running a therapy group. He had been kidnapping runaway teens, kids from bus stations, shelters, streets, kids nobody could trace or protect. He lured them with promises of food or safety, then transported them using those identical trucks deep into the wilderness. He forced them to work. Illegal logging, illegal mining, transporting stolen goods, long days, no food, punishments, starvation, threats. He told them nobody wanted them, nobody was looking for them, that he was the only one who cared. "How many kids?" I asked quietly. "Dozens," Sarah whispered. "Over 3 years. Some didn't make it." "What do you mean, didn't make it?" She pointed to the woods, tears streaking her face. "We found places he dug." Places he buried them. Search teams later found 4 burial sites, 4 kids who died trying to escape. Henderson had moved this operation across multiple states, always staying under the radar, choosing kids easy to disappear. They caught him near the Canadian border with the 5 surviving teens he fled with. He's serving life now, kidnapping, trafficking, abuse, murder. But what haunts me most is how close I came to driving away. How close I came to believing his perfect documents and perfect smile. If Sarah hadn't risked slipping me that note, Henderson would have vanished with those kids forever. The 3 who survived were hospitalized, stabilized, and eventually placed into real programs. Sarah aged out, went to college, and wants to work with vulnerable kids now. She calls me sometimes. I pretend I'm fine. I'm not. The 5 kids he fled with were never found. I still drive those long Alaska routes. Still stop when I see trucks staged where they shouldn't be. Still feel my pulse spike when someone hands me paperwork that looks too clean, too official, too rehearsed. Because the worst monsters aren't supernatural. They don't lurk in shadows or howl in the night. They smile. They shake your hand. They speak politely. They look normal. And they count on people like me to look away. I never will again. My name is Jake Morrison, and before I ever became a senior ranger at Chugach National Forest, I spent half my life behind the wheel of long-haul rigs. Alaska highways were my second home, frost-bitten passes, endless stretches of white wilderness, and roads so empty your own engine sounded like a heartbeat in the dark. Driving those routes teaches you something most people never learn. The wilderness watches you. It listens. It waits. And when it decides to take something, it takes fast. So when I tell you something out there rattled me, I want you to understand it takes a hell of a lot to shake a man who has hauled freight through blizzards that swallowed entire convoys. The call came in on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. I was drinking burnt truck stop coffee at the ranger station, thinking about how quiet the forest had been that week. My radio crackled, sharp enough to break the silence. Missing hiker. Name, Alex Thompson. Early 30s, software developer from Anchorage, experienced solo trekker. Not the type to wander off trail or forget basic safety. His GPS had shown clean progress for 4 full days on Glacier Creek trail check-ins on schedule. Speed steady, nothing strange. Then at exactly 5:14 a.m., one burst from his emergency beacon. A single ping. After that, nothing. No movement. No updates. No signal at all. In my trucking days, a dead radio meant a truck had gone over the edge or rolled into a ravine. Out here, it meant the forest had decided something. By 8 a.m., I assembled a 6-person search team. Mike Rodriguez, best tracker we had. Sarah Chen, our medical lead, with hands steady enough to sew a wound while a helicopter shook like it was falling apart. 4 SAR volunteers who knew the backcountry like truckers know every mile marker. The weather was perfect. Blue skies, a lazy breeze, air warm enough to fool you into thinking Alaska wasn't always sharpening its teeth. We hit the trail fast. 12 miles in, we reached Thompson's last known location. I expected chaos signs he'd been attacked, or panicked, or at least stumbled. Instead, the campsite looked staged. Tent anchored properly, rain flies secured tight. backpack resting beside it like he'd placed it there with care. Food stowed in a bear canister at the correct distance. Even the zipper of the sleeping bag was half open, perfectly straight. It looked like he planned to crawl into it just moments before he vanished. But he was gone. Completely gone. No disturbed dirt. No broken branches. No hasty footprints. Nothing that made sense. Then Sarah called out behind the tent. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of tremor that turns you blood cold. We circled around, and that's when I saw them. Thompson's hiking boots hanging from a branch nearly 30 feet up, laces still tied. Dangling in the breeze like someone had stepped right out of them and floated upward. Mike was kneeling nearby, staring at the ground with a face that didn't match the calm morning. "Jake," he said quietly, "look at this." I crouched down beside him and my stomach flipped. Footprints. Bare human-like prints. Except no human made them. 14 inches long, 7 inches wide. Deep enough to crush the earth under them. The stride between each step 3 feet. Mike looked up at me, pale despite the sunlight. If this is a person, they'd be 9 or 10 feet tall. And easily 600 pounds. Truckers know the feeling of being small out in the open. I'd felt that on frozen interstates in the middle of the night. But these tracks, it wasn't the same. This wasn't nature being big. This was something else choosing to leave signs behind. The tracks led off-trail, deeper into wild territory where maps were just suggestions. As we followed them, more signs appeared. Branches broken at impossible heights. Stones the size of engine blocks moved and stacked in patterns. Not random. Not natural. Intentional. They looked like markers. Or warnings. On the second day of the search, we found Thompson's shirt and jacket hanging from another high branch. Not shredded by animals, torn cleanly, hung deliberately. And bloodstains, but not splashed or smeared. They looked patterned. The search dogs refused to go near them. These were dogs trained to track through storms, trucks backfiring, even bear attacks. But they backed away, whining, pulling at their leads like something in that scent wasn't just dangerous. It was wrong in a way the natural world isn't supposed to be. That was when Tommy Williams, one of our volunteers, grabbed my arm so hard he nearly left bruises. "Ranger Morrison, something's watching us." He pointed across a stand of spruce 100 yards away. I lifted my binoculars. For a heartbeat less than that, I saw motion, something tall. Something dark, something impossibly fast weaving between the trees. 8, maybe 10 feet tall, covered in thick hair. Silent as a shadow moving uphill. "What was that?" Sarah whispered. Before I could answer, a sound drifted through the trees. A low vocalization. Not fully human, not fully animal. Like someone trying to speak underwater. The air itself seemed to shift. Then the rocks began. Not pebbles. Not stones someone could toss by hand. Softball-sized rocks launched from unseen angles, landing inches from our feet, not meant to hit us, meant to redirect. Meant to push us back. Hurting. Guarding. Warning. You drive long enough in Alaska, you learn when to push forward and when the road is telling you to turn back. The team felt that message loud and clear. By the end of day 2, everyone wanted out. They came here to save a missing hiker, not face creatures that shouldn't exist. As their leader, I couldn't make them stay. I radioed for extraction. But I stayed. Something inside me, maybe the same stubborn instinct that kept me alive on icy highways at 40 below, needed to know the truth. Alone, the forest felt different. The silence wasn't empty. It was aware of me, watching me, judging my presence. I followed the tracks deeper until I reached a clearing where half a dozen massive trees had been uprooted and arranged in a rough circle. Bark markings cut in repeating patterns covered nearby trunks, symbolic, rhythmic, deliberate, not vandalism, not random, something territorial, something ritualistic. Inside that circle was a shelter made from woven branches and moss, primitive but solid. And sitting inside, staring blankly like he was trapped somewhere far beyond reality, was Alex Thompson. Alive. Breathing. No frostbite. No dehydration. Not even weight loss. Just gone behind the eyes. Alex, I said, stepping carefully toward him. I'm Ranger Morrison. I'm here to take you home. No reaction. No blink. His eyes weren't unfocused. They were focused on something I couldn't see. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps behind me. Slow, controlled. Not sneaking. Approaching with intention. I turned. It stood towering above me. 8, maybe 10 feet tall. Covered in coarse brown hair. Shoulders wide as the hood of a truck. Arms long enough to reach the ground if it wanted. Its face was a blend of human intelligence and something older, wilder. Eyes dark and aware, jaw heavy and forward. But there was no threat in its posture, only awareness. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at Thompson. It stepped forward and made a soft grunting sound, low, resonant. Then it gestured, pointing at Thompson, then at me, then toward the direction of the trail. Not random. Communication. It knelt beside Thompson and rested one massive hand on his shoulder. Thompson blinked. His breath hitched. Life flickered behind his eyes. And what I saw wasn't fear. It was recognition. Like he'd been waiting for that touch. The creature stood. Looked directly at me. Pointed at Thompson again. A message I understood instantly. Take him. He's yours now. And then, without a sound, it disappeared into the trees. Like stepping behind an invisible curtain. It took 14 hours to get Thompson back. He walked, but he didn't speak until we reached the station. Paramedics were baffled, healthy, hydrated, even slightly heavier. Impossible for a man missing in the wilderness for days. Eventually, Thompson told me everything. The first night, he'd slipped, twisted his ankle, couldn't walk. While he sat near his tent trying to figure out how to crawl back to camp, something approached. The creature. Instead of attacking, it examined his injury, then lifted him like a child and carried him to the shelter. It took care of me, he whispered. Every day. Berries, fish, clean water. At night, it walked around the shelter, guarding me. He said there were more. A family group. 3 adults, 1 juvenile. They communicated through gestures and strange vocalizations. They understood he was hurt. They understood he couldn't survive alone. And on the final day, the creature kept watching the direction we eventually approached from, waiting for rescue. Waiting for us. The government sealed everything. My report vanished into classified archives. Tribal elders weren't surprised. They had legends about forest guardians who protect wanderers too injured to save themselves. Months have passed. I still patrol those areas. Sometimes I find stone stacks, bark markings, fresh tracks, signs that something watches from the shadows. Not hunting, not stalking, just guarding. Thompson recovered, returned to his old life. But he calls me every few weeks, voice quiet, restless. He dreams about the creature, dreams about protection, about something ancient watching over lost travelers. I've never told my family the truth. How do you explain that the wilderness isn't empty, that something intelligent lives out there, something gentle, something older than our roads and maps and fears, something that gives back instead of taking? Now, whenever a hiker goes missing, I hope we find them fast. But a small part of me, the part that knows the truth, hopes something else finds them first, because I've seen what lives in those woods. And it's nothing like the monster stories people tell. Sometimes the wilderness doesn't just take. Sometimes it saves you.